Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we bring you a chilling and twisted tale, one of power, deception, and the hidden world of organized crime. This is the story of the men who operate in the shadows, running empires built on crime and corruption, the Mafia bosses. A tale of wealth, secrecy, and ruthless ambition. This story will leave you wondering, how do these figures blend into society so seamlessly? What are the telltale signs that someone isn't just a businessman, but a crime lord pulling the strings behind the scenes? Stay with us as we unravel the clues that reveal the presence of a true mafia boss. The origins of the mafia stretch back to 19th century Sicily, where secret societies formed to protect local interests against corrupt rulers and external oppression. These groups, initially focused on vigilant justice, evolved into structured criminal organizations that wielded immense influence over communities. With strict codes of loyalty and silence, known as omerta, these organizations operated in the shadows, quietly expanding their power. By the early 20th century, waves of Italian immigrants brought this secretive underworld to America, where it adapted to the rapidly changing landscape of crime, business, and law enforcement. Prohibition in the 1920s was a turning point. With the U.S. government banning alcohol, a massive black market emerged, and the mafia capitalized on the opportunity. Bootlegging became an empire, fueling the rise of some of the most notorious crime figures in history. Al Capone, operating out of Chicago, built a fortune through illegal liquor distribution, bribing police, controlling politicians, and eliminating rivals with brutal efficiency. His reign ended with a prison sentence for tax evasion, but he set the template for the modern mob boss, ruthless, calculating, and always 2 steps ahead of the law. As the mafia expanded, so did its structure. Organized crime families developed a strict hierarchy that ensured control remained in the hands of a few powerful figures. At the top sat the boss, the undisputed leader who made all major decisions. Just below him was the underboss, often a trusted second-in-command who handled day-to-day operations and was next in line for power. The consigliere, an advisor with no direct command over soldiers, played a crucial role in strategy and conflict resolution. Beneath them, capos led smaller crews of soldiers, overseeing illegal businesses, enforcing orders, and carrying out the boss's will. This structure created a chain of command that insulated those at the top from direct involvement in crimes, making prosecution difficult. One of the most significant shifts in mafia power came in the 1930s, when Charles "Lucky" Luciano restructured the American mafia. Unlike previous bosses who ruled with an iron fist, Luciano saw the benefit of organization over chaos. He established the Commission, a governing body of crime families that prevented unnecessary wars and maintained stability. This move solidified the mafia's presence in America, allowing it to expand into industries beyond bootlegging. Gambling, loan sharking, extortion, and labor unions became lucrative enterprises. Luciano's vision turned the mafia into a sophisticated, corporate-style entity that functioned like a shadow government, operating where legitimate institutions fell short. As decades passed, the mafia's influence reached its peak in the mid-20th century. Figures like Vito Genovese, Carlo Gambino, and John Gotti became synonymous with power, wealth, and untouchability. Gambino, in particular, perfected the art of quiet control. Unlike the flashy Capone or the aggressive Luciano, he maintained a low profile, ensuring law enforcement had little to use against him. His patience and strategic thinking allowed him to rule for decades, making him one of the most successful bosses in history. John Gotti, on the other hand, took a different approach. Charismatic and brazen, he embraced the spotlight, earning the nickname the Dapper Don for his extravagant suits and public persona. Unlike his predecessors who operated in secrecy, Gotti enjoyed media attention, believing his influence made him untouchable. But this arrogance proved to be his downfall. The FBI, which had spent years struggling to take down top mafia figures, finally found a weak link. Gotti's underboss, Sammy the Bull Gravano, flipped, providing enough testimony to convict Gotti in 1992. Despite Gotti's fall, the mafia was far from finished. Its ability to adapt ensured its survival. While law enforcement cracked down on high-profile figures, Crime families shifted their focus, integrating themselves further into legitimate businesses. Construction, waste management, even Wall Street became avenues for money laundering and control. The Mafia no longer needed to engage in street violence to assert power. They could manipulate economies from boardrooms instead. The rise of the mob boss is a story of ambition, intelligence, and brutality. Each generation refined its methods, learning from the mistakes of those who came before. From the blood-soaked streets of Prohibition-era America to the polished corridors of corporate influence, the Mafia evolved, proving that power doesn't always come from the barrel of a gun. It thrives in silence, patience, and the ability to remain unseen. The question is no longer how the Mafia rose to power, but how many of its leaders still operate in plain sight, hidden behind the facade of legitimacy. A true mob boss never announces his power. He doesn't need to. His presence alone commands respect, and his influence extends far beyond what the average person can see. Unlike street-level criminals who rely on violence and intimidation to make their mark, a boss operates with a level of control so refined that even law enforcement struggles to pin anything directly on him. The most dangerous thing about a mob boss isn't his ability to pull a trigger, it's his ability to make others do it for him, often without ever giving a direct order. Power in the Mafia world is built on perception. A boss doesn't raise his voice, doesn't throw punches, and doesn't make threats. Instead, his authority is woven into every interaction. A single glance can end a conversation. A nod can change someone's fate. Subtle gestures replace explicit commands, and those who understand the meaning behind them don't question their intent. Respect is expected, fear is a given, and those who break the unspoken rules quickly disappear from the equation. Unlike a traditional businessman, a mob boss rarely moves alone. He is always surrounded by trusted individuals, men who act as both bodyguards and gatekeepers, ensuring that only those deemed worthy get close. This inner circle is more than just protection, it's a carefully curated network of enforcers, informants, and strategists. Everyone has a role, whether it's handling disputes, managing finances, or keeping law enforcement distracted. The boss himself remains at the center of it all, untouched by the chaos swirling around him. His network extends beyond the criminal underworld. Politicians, law enforcement officers, and business executives all fall under his sphere of influence, whether through bribery, blackmail, or mutual interest. A simple favor granted today can become an unpayable debt tomorrow. These relationships are the foundation of his empire, ensuring that even if the authorities come knocking, there's always someone in the right position to make the problem go away. Connections aren't just valuable, they're a necessity for survival. Beyond his relationships, a mob boss exhibits a level of control over his surroundings that sets him apart from the average criminal. He isn't reckless, and he isn't impulsive. Every move is calculated, every word measured. He never speaks carelessly, never leaves a paper trail, and never allows himself to be recorded discussing business. His meetings take place in trusted locations, often in the back rooms of restaurants, behind the doors of private clubs, or in places where surveillance is impossible. Nonverbal communication plays a key role in his leadership. A slight change in tone, a deliberate pause, or a raised eyebrow can carry more weight than an outright demand. His ability to manipulate people without ever appearing to do so is what makes him so effective. Those around him instinctively know what he wants, often before he even says a word. The most loyal members of his circle don't need direct instructions, they understand the implications of his gestures, his silences, and his carefully chosen phrasing. Another telltale sign of a mob boss is his ability to maintain an air of invulnerability. No matter what pressures he faces, he remains calm, composed, and in complete control. A police raid, an assassination attempt, even the betrayal of a close associate, none of it rattles him. If he reacts, it's always on his terms, never in the heat of the moment. The best mob bosses never show weakness, never panic, and never allow anyone to see them as anything other than untouchable. Perhaps the most unnerving aspect of a mob boss's presence is the way the world seems to bend around him. When he enters a room, conversations shift. When he makes a request, doors open. When he sets his sights on something, obstacles vanish. The people around him anticipate his needs, cater to his desires, and fear his disapproval. He doesn't need to be loud, flashy, or aggressive. His power is woven into the very fabric of the environment he controls. Spotting a mob boss isn't about looking for the loudest, most aggressive figure in the room. It's about identifying the one who doesn't need to assert himself, the one whose authority is so deeply ingrained that it no longer requires reinforcement. He is the man everyone defers to, the one whose presence dictates the flow of every conversation, the one who never seems to ask for anything because everything is already his. The real question isn't whether he's in control. It's whether anyone around him truly understands just how deep that control goes. A mob boss doesn't live like the typical criminal. He doesn't run from the law, act impulsively, or flaunt his power recklessly. Instead, his life is a carefully constructed illusion balancing secrecy, control, and legitimacy. While his empire may be built on crime, his habits are designed to keep him insulated from it. Every aspect of his daily routine, from the people he associates with to the places he visits, is calculated to reinforce his authority while keeping him untouchable. Discretion is the foundation of his existence. Unlike low-level criminals who draw attention with flashy displays, a true mob boss understands that the key to long-term power is remaining in the shadows. He may have wealth, but he rarely flaunts it. Instead of driving ostentatious sports cars, he opts for understated luxury, well-tailored suits, expensive yet inconspicuous watches, and vehicles that blend into high society rather than stand out in a crowd. His home isn't a neon-lit mansion surrounded by cameras and armed guards. It's a carefully chosen property in an upscale neighborhood where privacy is valued and questions are rarely asked. Despite his low profile, his presence is unmistakable. Every movement is deliberate, every appearance carefully planned. He avoids crowded places where he could be vulnerable and chooses instead to frequent establishments he owns or controls. Restaurants, clubs, and private lounges become his office, places where conversations can happen without fear of prying eyes or recording devices. Meetings are scheduled in locations that make surveillance difficult, and no conversation ever takes place in the same spot twice. Even his most trusted associates know better than to call or text him directly. Communication is always routed through intermediaries, ensuring that his name never appears on a wiretap or in a court document. Loyalty is his greatest asset, and he cultivates it with precision. Those closest to him are not just employees or partners, they are extensions of his will, bound by years of shared history, debts, and unspoken agreements. He ensures their loyalty through a mixture of generosity and fear. A wedding gift, a favor, or financial security for a family member reinforces the idea that their well-being is tied to his success. At the same time, he makes it clear that betrayal is unforgivable. The consequences of disloyalty are swift and absolute, serving as a warning to others. Those who cross him do not get second chances. The ability to maintain control depends on his capacity to keep his empire stable. While many see the Mafia as a purely violent organization, a true boss relies on intelligence, not brutality. Violence is a last resort, used only when absolutely necessary. The real power lies in knowing when to act and when to step back, allowing problems to resolve themselves through influence rather than force. A quiet phone call to the right person, a subtle reminder of an unpaid debt, or a sudden business opportunity for a potential rival often eliminates threats more effectively than a bullet ever could. Despite his criminal roots, a mob boss understands the importance of appearing legitimate. Many of history's most powerful crime lords have used legal businesses to mask their operations. Restaurants, trucking companies, construction firms, and real estate ventures provide perfect cover, allowing illicit profits to be laundered while presenting an image of respectability. His name may appear on charity donation lists, his businesses may sponsor local events, and his public persona may resemble that of a civic-minded businessman rather than a criminal mastermind. The more he integrates into society, the harder it becomes to separate his illegal dealings from his legitimate enterprises. This pursuit of legitimacy is not just about evading law enforcement, it is also about legacy. A mob boss does not simply seek wealth, he seeks permanence. While street-level criminals come and go, he builds something that outlives him. His businesses, his influence, and his carefully crafted reputation ensure that even if he disappears, his power remains. Some of the most successful mob bosses in history were never convicted, not because they were innocent, but because they mastered the art of making themselves appear untouchable. At the heart of it all is control. Every interaction, every financial move, every public appearance is designed to reinforce the idea that he is the one pulling the strings. He does not react to the world, he shapes it to his advantage. Those who oppose him find themselves isolated. Those who question him find their opportunities disappear, and those who serve him find their lives improved. His power is not just in the crimes he commits, but in the empire he builds, one where his influence stretches far beyond the criminal world and into the very fabric of society. The question is never whether he is in control, it is whether anyone else even realizes just how much control he truly has. A mob boss's life is one of extremes, power and paranoia, wealth and violence, loyalty and betrayal. It is a world where success is measured not just by money, but by influence, where a single misstep can mean the difference between ruling an empire and vanishing without a trace. Few men rise to the top, and even fewer stay there. The rewards are immense, but the dangers are even greater. For every legendary crime lord who built an empire, there were dozens who fell before they could truly cement their place in history. The allure of this life is undeniable. To command fear and respect with nothing more than a glance, to control businesses, politicians, and law enforcement without ever stepping into the public eye, this is the kind of power that goes beyond mere wealth. A mob boss doesn't just make money, he makes things happen. He decides who rises and who falls, who gets a second chance and who disappears forever. The world bends to his will, but the price of that power is a life where trust is a weakness and survival is never guaranteed. At the height of his reign, a boss seems invincible. He moves through the world with an untouchable aura, surrounded by trusted men, insulated from the crimes that built his fortune. Politicians shake his hand, businessmen respect his influence, and law enforcement struggles to gather evidence against him. He doesn't need to make threats, his reputation does that for him. Every decision is made with precision, ensuring that no act of violence or corruption can be traced back to him. He may never pull a trigger, never handle the dirty work himself, but his orders are carried out with ruthless efficiency. Yet for all his power, the risks never disappear. The Mafia has always been a world of shifting loyalties, and the same men who once swore allegiance can become informants overnight. A single betrayal can unravel years of carefully laid plans. Federal agents work tirelessly to find weaknesses, listening in on hushed conversations, flipping lower-level soldiers in the hope of climbing the chain. The greatest danger isn't always a rival family or an ambitious underboss, it's the slow, creeping pressure of law enforcement tightening its grip. The weight of his decisions follows him everywhere. A boss must constantly be aware of the threats around him, not just from the outside but from within. A trusted advisor can become a liability, a longtime friend can be working for the government, and an enforcer who knows too much can become a target. Paranoia is not a disorder in this world, it's a survival tactic. The moment he lets his guard down, he's as good as dead. The history of organized crime is littered with stories of powerful men who believed they were untouchable, only to find themselves betrayed by those they trusted most. Even if he evades the law and his enemies, time itself becomes his greatest adversary. Few bosses retire peacefully. The longer he holds power, the more enemies he makes, the more bodies he buries, and the more people who want to see him gone. Some are taken down in dramatic arrests, their names splashed across newspapers as symbols of justice finally served. Others vanish into witness protection, trading their empires for anonymity in a desperate bid to escape the life they once controlled. But even those who die free rarely die in peace. Old age does not erase the sins of the past, and ghosts have a way of catching up. Despite the inevitable fall, the influence of a mob boss rarely ends with his death or imprisonment. The legacy he leaves behind can last for generations, shaping criminal enterprises, business empires, and entire industries long after he is gone. The wealth he accumulated may be funneled through legitimate ventures, ensuring that his family never has to answer for the crimes that built their fortune. His name may be whispered in back rooms, his methods studied by those who wish to follow in his footsteps. In some cases, his death only fuels his legend, making him larger in the public imagination than he ever was in life. The life of a mob boss is not simply about crime, it is about control, manipulation, and an unrelenting pursuit of power. It is a life where success is measured in decades, not years, and where the line between triumph and disaster is razor thin. Those who rise to the top do so with a combination of intelligence, ruthlessness, and luck. But no matter how carefully they build their empire, one truth remains in the end: the Mafia never forgets, and the house they spent their lives constructing can crumble in an instant. The question is never if they will fall, it is simply a matter of when and how. A mob boss never looks like what people expect. He isn't the loudest person in the room, the one throwing money around, or the one making obvious threats. He doesn't need to be. His authority is unspoken, his influence embedded in the way others react to him. He is the man whose presence causes a subtle shift in the air, the one whose arrival makes people straighten their posture, lower their voices, and pay close attention to his every move. Spotting him isn't about looking for someone who acts like a criminal, it's about recognizing the man who doesn't have to. His behavior is precise and controlled, never erratic or reckless. Unlike low-level criminals who live chaotically, a boss moves with purpose. He never appears nervous, never raises his voice in anger, and never rushes a decision. His confidence is absolute because he knows that everything is in place to protect him. He doesn't carry weapons, he has men for that. He doesn't start fights because if he wants someone gone, it happens quietly without a scene. His real power isn't in his fists or his threats. It's in the way people bend to his will without him having to demand it. His appearance is equally strategic. While some bosses prefer an understated look, blending into high society without drawing attention, others cultivate an image of power, expensive suits, polished shoes, and subtle but unmistakable displays of wealth. What he never is, however, is sloppy. Every detail, from the way he dresses to the way he carries himself, reinforces his authority. People listen when he speaks because everything about him suggests that he is a man who cannot be ignored. The people around him are another clue. A true boss is rarely alone. His inner circle moves with him, acting as both protection and gatekeepers. These men aren't just bodyguards, they are trusted enforcers, advisors, and longtime associates. Their loyalty is absolute, not because of fear alone, but because they know that standing beside him ensures their survival and success. They anticipate his needs, defer to his judgment, and enforce his will without needing to be told. When he enters a room, the way these men react to him tells the real story, not with words, but with deference, silent understanding, and an awareness that he is the center of their world. His relationships extend far beyond his criminal circle. Unlike a street-level thug, a mob boss has connections in places most wouldn't expect. Local businesses welcome him like an honored guest, politicians shake his hand with respect, and even law enforcement may look the other way in his presence. He is more than just a criminal, he is a figure of influence. Some people work with him willingly, others because they have no choice. But the result is the same. He operates in a world where his name carries weight, even among those who claim to stand against him. There are small but telling behaviors that give him away. He is always aware of his surroundings, rarely caught off guard. His seating choice in a restaurant ensures that he has a clear view of the room and an easy exit. Conversations with him are never recorded, and his name is rarely spoken in connection with anything illegal. He doesn't conduct business through texts or emails. Face-to-face meetings are the norm. If something must be said over the phone, it is carefully worded, vague, and often passed through intermediaries. He trusts very few people, and those who betray him don't get second chances. Despite the efforts to maintain secrecy, certain patterns emerge. Unexplained wealth, businesses that always seem to succeed regardless of the economy, associates with criminal pasts who seem to move freely without fear. These are red flags. He may own restaurants, construction companies, or private clubs, all of which serve as legitimate fronts for his empire. Money flows through his hands in ways that don't always make sense, and yet he is never directly tied to anything illegal. For those paying attention, the signs are there. A mob boss isn't just a man, he is a force, an invisible power that dictates the course of events without ever needing to be seen. He doesn't leave obvious trails, but his influence is unmistakable. Those who challenge him disappear from the conversation, while those who support him find doors opening where they were once closed. His world is built on control, on perception, on ensuring that even when people suspect, they never have enough proof. The best way to spot a mob boss isn't to look for the man acting like a king, it's to find the man who never has to. He is the one whose authority is never questioned, the one whose approval is sought in whispers, the one who doesn't need to demand respect because it is given to him without hesitation. He exists in the space between fear and admiration, between silence and power, and by the time anyone truly realizes who he is, it is already too late. If you suspect someone may be involved in organized crime, remember, stay alert, trust your instincts, and report suspicious activity to the authorities. The Mafia thrives on silence, but knowledge is power. What do you think? Have you ever spotted these signs in someone before? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into the world of organized crime, don't forget to like and subscribe to Mystery Minds for more chilling true crime stories.